Welcome to the Bold Moves How Did You Know podcast, a podcast for the naturally curious who want to define their own path. Here, I'm sharing bold move stories that propelled my guests from curiosity to action. And in doing so, they've defined a path that is purposeful to them. Through these stories, I hope you'll be inspired to pursue your boldest dreams. Today, I'm welcoming a very special guest to the show. Morli Desai is a CEO, a leader, a single mother, the daughter of immigrant parents, and a change maker with a strong vision for an inclusive future for everyone. She's lived all over the world, including New York, Philadelphia, Denver, and Singapore. Now she lives in Atlanta. She started her career on Wall Street, and now she's running Amaira Natural Skincare, a plant-based skincare solutions company. Like all of us, Morley is not defined by one thing. As you can see, she's defined by many different things all at one time. I am so excited she's joining me today on the podcast. Welcome, Morley. I am so glad you're here. How are you today?
Thank you, Kristen. I'm excited to be here and talking about things that I'm very passionate about.
I have a quick story to tell you, so I hope that's okay. It's going to lead us into the first question. So, a few months ago, I had been talking to my friend about this podcast. I was telling her that I'm aiming to bring on a lot of stories that reflect bold moves, but they're also diverse in nature. Like, it's really important for me that I have guests on who are making bold moves in every different way. And she said something to me. She said, have you thought about telling the bold stories of immigrants? And I thought, yes, that so resonates with me because I know how hard it is to move, or like I understand, I don't personally know, but like how hard it is to move from one country where your life is in one place and then you move somewhere else and completely start from scratch. And your parents immigrated here. You're the daughter of immigrant parents. I wanted to start by asking that question. What boldness was instilled in you during your childhood that you're grateful for today?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I love telling my origin story or my story of my parents, especially because my dad has passed now. So it's so great to reminisce, and a lot of my story comes from what
Mhm.
they told me. And so my dad actually grew up in East Africa. They're originally from India, but when they were growing up, it was still a British colony, as was most of East Africa. And my grandfather was a school teacher, so he went over to build a school for a lot of the merchant population that were a lot of the Indians that were migrating from. There was a big trade route from the west side of India to the east side of Africa, and so I feel like that kind of started it where he was far away from home. He has this amazing story that I heard recently that my uncle told about coming over on the steamer ship that would take a couple of weeks and
Mm.
having extremely bad seasickness, thinking that he was going to die, and just the story of adventure. And we're actually, as a family, going back to Tanzania now in another couple of weeks to kind of see where they all grew up.
Amazing.
And then he spent some time in the UK, and then he came to the States in the 70s. He was kind of following along. It was his older brother. And so he went with him. He wasn't married at the time. And then my grandfather called him back home and said, "It's time for you to get married." And at the time, they were all arranged marriages. And so he had gone home. He had met my mother. And 3 hours later, they had gotten engaged. And then 2 weeks later, they had gotten married. And then he brought my mother to the States for the first time.
Wow.
And then she's got this amazing story of not even knowing English and wanting to get a job and just being fired from like a number of jobs because she just didn't know the language. And then
Mm.
eventually just working her way up. She worked in a bank. She was very smart. Then she worked as an accountant. She went back to school. She got her accounting degree. She got her CPA. She opened up a business and now has a very successful accounting practice and small business bookkeeping practice. And that has been such an inspiration for me in my journey, which I think we'll talk about in terms of
Mhm.
navigating from working in corporate to entrepreneurship. But yeah, it hugely influential on my life.
As you were growing up, when you were watching them, what were you ingesting about their experience? Like, what were you seeing was possible from your parents who have this incredible story and have continued to define their life by building and building and building, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very blessed I didn't see traditional gender roles. And even coming from India, which is a very also patriarchal society, I didn't see
Mm,
that in my family. So my dad was a pharmacist, he had the stable job. My mother was working full time, also going to night school to get her CPA. And then when I was in middle school, started her business. And my dad was very supportive. He was the one that would pick us up from school and make sure we were fed and our homework was done. And we went to bed so that
mm,
my mom could go to night school and get her CPA. And so I didn't see these traditional gender roles where like the mom had to be at home and had to be the one cooking.
mm,
And so it just was very, very
mm.
influential where I'm just like, when you see someone doing things that are not the traditional, but that was what was normal growing up. It was just normal for me to say, yeah, I want to have a career. I want to be able to take chances and eventually own a business and still
Yeah.
have a family and do it too and feel like I wasn't stuck to the traditional patriarchal gender roles.
You told me when we first connected that you blew up your career, your marriage, and became a single mom all in a very short amount of time. And so all I picture is like the emoji with the head, popping off or all the smoke. What got you to the place of knowing that you wanted to blow up your life? And so maybe that means taking us back a little bit into
Mhm.
your earlier career to set the scene for us, and then let us know what was the feeling, what was the situation going on that you wanted to blow up your life.
Yeah, coming out of undergrad, worked on Wall Street, was really focused on career and kind of being that ambitious businesswoman. Did that for a couple of years and then went back to school and got my MBA and met someone there. We fell in love, we decided to get married, but I always had that ambition in me. And, it was interesting because we had met each other at Wharton. So we were both kind of like ambitious people. We had a lot of great ideas and visions of what we wanted to take our career. And so we had to kind of go back and forth. And I felt like in the first couple of years, it really worked well, where my job gave us some opportunities to live abroad and then come back. And so we kind of shifted a little bit. And then when we decided to have kids, things started to shift a little bit in our roles. And having children just took a little bit of time. We lost our first pregnancy to miscarriage. And so it was this 5-year period where we ended up having two beautiful boys. And in that period, looking back now, I just lost myself. I put everything else before me. So I put my career before me. I was working for Medtronic, a big corporate medical device company. I was traveling every other week on the road. I had put becoming a mom in front of it and just was so anxious and just like the mental resource that went towards that. Put my husband, put my marriage, and I just put myself last because that was just, again, what I thought what I needed to do. And coming out of that, it just didn't work at some point. And so in 2020, being a very influential point where, my co-parent and I decided that we just weren't making each other happy. I had the two babies at the time, and the youngest one had finally turned 1. And so I felt like I could get my body back at that point. I was
Mm.
about to turn 40, which I feel like is one of those pivotal moments where you just kind of like, okay, I'm half done. Like, what do I want my life to be? And oh, there was this little pandemic going on that caused all of us to like stop and take stock. And so I ended up exiting from my marriage. I ended up, deciding that my corporate role was not giving me what I needed and walking away and deciding that entrepreneurship is what I truly wanted. And then I ended up embracing COVID and saying, you know what, I'm going to put myself first and I'm going to take care of myself and put that emergency mask on my face first so that I can take care of everyone else, including my two little boys.
Man, that must have taken a lot. You can speak about it so clearly now, right? But it must have taken so much inner strength to be able to get to that place where you're like, I need to reorganize all of this. You talked about losing your identity. Which is interesting, especially at that midlife point. I think, like, as you said, we kind of come to a reckoning about what is our identity. And
Mm-hmm.
we have so many different identities. I'll tell you a quick story. Morley and I were at a networking dinner last night, and we did this identity exercise where we were asked to provide four different roles or identities for ourselves and talk about what those identities meant to us. And it just goes to the point that we're not one thing, right? We have a lot of different roles, we have a lot of different identities that we play. And I think when people put too much focus into career is a big one, right? They put too much focus into their career. You get to a place where you start looking around and thinking, wait a minute, this can't be what this life is all about. Is that kind of what happened for you, Morley?
Absolutely. It was like in my marriage, in my career, in life in general. I picked my head up and I was like, okay, this isn't what's making me happy. I don't feel like I am living what my mission is.
Mm. So, what was the first step you took when you knew the reckoning happened and you knew something's got to change? What was the very first thing you did?
It was committing to put myself first and investing in
Mm,
myself. And really, that was about
mm,
my wellness and saying, okay, again, I was 1 year kind of postpartum after having like my two sons within 18 months of each other. And so I did not feel healthy
mm,
in my body. I did not feel like I was
mm,
just getting the hormones out. And I was like, I am just going to commit to
mm,
feeling better. And it started with
mm,
movement and just saying, I am
mm.
going to make sure that I move at least 20 minutes a day and really not making it anything that was too onerous and just starting there and then just building
Yeah.
onto it. And I added meditation to that. I added my eating habits to that. I added making sure I got 8 hours of sleep to that. And I just started building on and
Mm,
prioritizing that. And I felt like, okay, when I got to a point where I felt like as a human that I could do that, then I worked on the other
yeah.
stuff. And so, but the first part was committing to put
Well,
myself first.
yeah, the wellness factor. And as you said, it started with your body and the movement, but then expanded into the meditation and some other mental maybe things that you were doing, emotional, to round out that picture. And through that process, did it help you start to see again who you were, like really coming to terms with, oh, this is Morley at this
Mhm.
stage of her life?
And it just made me realize like there were only really three things that brought me joy and like made me feel like a real person, and that was
Mm,
myself, my family, and my mission. And my mission is to empower women, and I really
mm,
re-architected my whole life around those three priorities. And around myself it
mm.
was like, my wellness, my connections, coming the other thing coming out of my marriage, when I like lifted my head up and I was like,
Yeah.
where is my girlfriends, where are my community? No one was there for me, and it just made me realize like through my marriage I also neglected those girlfriend
Mm,
relationships where I
yeah.
defaulted to the couple relationships and I let my co-parent pick who those were going to be, because I was
Mm,
busy with trying to have babies and I was busy with work. And so I had to redefine a whole new
mm,
community. And I realized that strong girlfriend relationships bring me a lot of energy and a lot of creativity and a lot of inspiration. So I had to do that.
mm,
And then I also love to learn and to read. And so, I'm a very big reader and I had moved away from that. And so just, again, myself, my family, making sure that my boys are getting everything they need, especially now in this dual household, reconnecting with my immediate family, my mother and my brother and my extended family, which I had neglected them all when I was so in
uh-huh.
microcosm in my marriage. And then my
Mhm,
mission, which is about empowering women, is really about finding an entrepreneurial opportunity where I could live that mission and empower women. And so
mm,
it just was that was the North Star. And it became so easy to drop the HOA
mm,
board, to drop like the volunteer activities that I was doing out of obligation and not because they were actually feeding me, to drop the toxic relationships, right? Because they weren't giving me what I needed. And so it helped me to kind of say it's these three things. If it doesn't fit in there, then it's just not something that I want to be spending energy and time towards.
I'm so glad that you're really taking us step by step because I feel, like so many people are in that place of, especially midlife, are reevaluating, is this the life that I want to live for the next 40 years, the next 50 years? I mean, we're living longer than ever, so this is amazing. But it is like, okay, I have some perspective on the past 30, 40 years, and I've done some incredible things, but along the way, are there areas in which maybe I've lost myself, or I've been playing too much into this one area, and for my well-being I really need to round this out a little bit more. So that inventory that you're talking about
Mhm.
is such a critical part to starting your next bold move, to getting to that next place. And in the bold moves recipe, that is where we start, is your desire, and it's really going inward and spending as much time as you need there to reevaluate all of these things and do a lot of the critical thinking that so many of us put off because it's easier to do the mindless,
Yep.
chores at home, doing what you need to do at the office. It's harder to carve out that time for you. I'm really, really glad that you shared all of that. We're going to get into Amara skincare
Yeah.
soon, but you talked about your children's father as your co-parent,
Hmm.
not as your ex-husband. And I know for you that was an intentional choice. Can you talk a little bit more about how you are, it's like not just redefining your life and your career, but also redefining what your relationship looks like. It may not be a marriage, but I know that you have this intentional mindset around how you and your co-parent are moving forward. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think
Hmm.
it's so inspiring to hear other people's approaches, that there isn't just one way to do it.
And I'm very blessed. I have a very strong relationship with my co-parent. We we communicated throughout our whole entire marriage, and we never lost trust. So what I'm really grateful for is when we weren't feeling that our marriage was what we want it to be, we immediately worked with the therapist, and it was a safe space for us to express our feelings. And while there was a lot of grief and sadness and anger and hurt, we moved through it together and decided together that we just weren't making each other happy, but that we had many beautiful things about our relationship, one of which was raising our two kids together. And we didn't need to be married to do that successfully. And so, I say we have privilege that we could decide to separate and still continue to co-parent together. And that's what we decided to do, to allow each of us to go out there and find, right, what makes us happy and what brings us joy. And so we were very intentional about at first we were calling it uncoupling, but our
Yeah.
separating. And, and I don't call it divorce. I call just getting unmarried. I don't call him my
Yeah.
ex-husband. I call him my co-parent, because that's really the identity that we have for each other, first and foremost. And it's been really nice for the last 3 years. He's actually lived right across the street from me, and we have done a lot of stuff together, especially through COVID. And then as the years have gone on, we've done a little bit more asynchronous parenting. But I still feel like he supports me. If I need him, we're always giving each other the benefit of the doubt. And again, it's always, we've got kind of three mantras for our unmarrying, which is the kids always come first. And so always making decisions for their benefit. Two is you're responsible for your own happiness, where I felt like in our marriage, we got a little bit codependent and we're kind of feeding off of each other, and, feeling that the other person was responsible for our unhappiness. And then third was preserve wealth. So we did not use lawyers in our divorce. We did everything together through a counselor and just made sure, the goal was, again, to focus on the kids and make sure that they were set up in a way that this wasn't going to be something traumatic for them, but something that a good example for them of two people that love them very dearly and that will always love them and have love for each other, and can do this in a way that it's something that adds to all of our lives and not takes away.
You've intentionally not let the societal noise of how it usually is done play into how you do it. You've defined the rules amongst yourselves in your family to create a situation that works for you. And ultimately, that's what I think we're doing here on the podcast is it, you know, block out the noise and just come from this place of what feels good for me and the other people that are involved in your life, of course, right? Thank you again for sharing that piece of it as well. Let's transition now
Yeah.
to Amara. Unlike other people we've spoken to on this podcast, you actually went out and purchased a business that was in alignment with your values. So, talk about that. Why
Mhm.
did you decide that you would purchase a business versus start your own company?
Yeah. So going back to my mom's story, because she started a business when I was in middle school and then through high school. And so, and I, growing up watching her and what it took to build something from scratch, I knew I always
Yeah.
wanted to be a business owner, but I didn't feel like I had that like great idea of what to do. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go work on Wall Street and then maybe it'll come to me. Or I'm going to go back and get my MBA, maybe it'll come to me. Or I'm going to go and work in corporate. And it just, nothing ever dawned on me. And what I realized, it wasn't so much about having that brilliant startup idea, it was more, I just didn't really have that energy, that desire to start something from scratch. It takes a very special person to bootstrap, to kind of hustle and get something off the ground. And what I realized was that I love growing stuff. I love innovating rather than inventing. And
Mm.
a couple of years ago, which now it's been a while, I had met someone and I was kind of lamenting about corporate and how it was just like sucking the lifeblood out of me. And saying, and she was like, well, why don't you just acquire, buy an existing business? And it was like this
Sure.
record scratch where I was like, what? Like you can buy
Yeah.
existing businesses? And she's like, yeah. She's like, there's people that love starting stuff from the ground, get it to a certain size, and they realize they don't have the desire or the skill set to get it to the next level. I was on Wall Street, like I did mergers and acquisitions. I just don't know why it didn't dawn on me that that was something. And so I started exploring, reading about it. And the more that I learned, the more it just felt right in my body. I'm like, this is it. I'd love to take something
Mm.
existing. I had been at a corporate, I'd been doing strategic marketing and building brands. So I was like, gosh, I would love to take something and then build it and get it to the next level, especially with all of my big corporate experience. And
Yeah.
so that's what I set out to do, was to find a small business that was something that I could afford with the bank loan. And then, yeah, and then try to
Uh-huh.
grow it from there.
Mind blowing again. Like, incredible. You can go about what you want to do in so many different ways. I'm watching the show Suits. Have you
Mm.
ever seen that show? Okay.
I've heard of it,
There's
but I
a
haven't seen it yet. Yeah.
Well, the there it's kind of like two lawyers. One is the partner lawyer and then the other is the associate supporting the partner lawyer. And in one of the very early episodes, the associate comes to the partner lawyer with a problem. And I see this option and that option. So I see two options. And the partner goes, there's 146 different solutions for every problem. Go back to the drawing board.
Mm.
And I'm sharing that story only because I think sometimes we do get into tunnel vision. Sometimes we don't think broad enough and we sometimes we just don't know all the solutions that are available to us. But that's what I love about your story is that you were only seeing this one way of starting a business and it just took somebody else to plant the seed in your mind to be like, there's actually a different way to do this. Have you thought about it? How do you research a
Mhm.
company that wants to be bought? What does that look
Yeah,
like?
yeah, and it's so interesting because, like, when people ask me that all the time, and I'm always like, "There's business brokers out there similar to
Mhm.
real estate brokers," and so
Okay.
I just through networking, right, connected with a bunch of different business brokers, and they've got business listings, and so I just, I looked at probably 50 or 60 different businesses. And I think it's important to kind of like, because when I first got into it, I honestly didn't know what kind of business. And I was all over the place. I only knew that I wanted to stay in Atlanta because that's where my family is.
Yeah.
And I needed to look at a good number of businesses and really imagine myself like running them. And
Yep.
then also go through the practice of evaluating businesses because all businesses are not equal. And just, yeah, and it took about a good 18 months from like start to
Uh-huh.
finish to look at as many businesses as possible, evaluate
Hmm.
them, and then kind of keep moving down the path. And I had decided that e-commerce was where I wanted to finally acquire. And it's because I loved the flexibility. It's a completely virtual business, so I could do it from anywhere. And with being a single mom, it's really important for me to be able to have that flexibility and that availability for my two boys. And then it's mostly about marketing. Like digital marketing is the lifeblood of e-commerce, and having a marketing background and loving data, it just fit kind of
Yeah.
my interest and my skill set. And then third, the business I ended up buying was a business that was targeted towards women and helping women feel authentic and confident in their natural skin.
I love that. Okay, so when did you purchase Amara?
So yeah, so I bought Amaira Natural Skincare in kind of mid 2022. So it's been about 18 months since I've been operating the business.
Wow. I'd love for you to explain the line of skincare and how it's different because I know that there is some differences about how you approach skincare and the market that is buying product from you.
Yeah, so our tagline is we lighten, tighten, and restore your most delicate areas. So it's an intimate skincare company. And I always tell my story of growing up. I've got Indian descent, so I've got a little bit more melanin in my skin, and hyperpigmentation was always a huge insecurity of mine. I had really bad
Mhm.
acne. I would get these terrible acne scars that would like last forever. I also was very insecure about my underarms. So I would never
Mhm.
wear sleeveless shirts because even if I shaved my underarms like super, super well, because the skin just naturally was like a darker pigment there, I just felt like it looked like I had hairy armpits. And I was so self conscious
Mhm.
about this in bathing suits, same thing, like my knees and my elbows. And so Amira's hero product is we have a natural plant-based lightening serum that just uses natural plant-based ingredients to even out skin tone and reduce some of the overproduction in melanin. If I would have had this product when I was a kid, it just would have helped me so much, especially with women when we go through hormonal changes, pregnancy. You can get a lot of different hyperpigmentation. I got this like line down
Mhm.
my belly when I was pregnant,
Yeah.
and it doesn't go away. And using a natural product is very important so that you're not putting any toxins in your skin. So this was a perfect fit in
Mhm.
terms of it's helping me meet my mission. It's
Yeah.
giving me the flexibility that I need to kind of be present for myself and for my kids. And it's challenging me like, oh, is it challenging me like every single day?
Owning a business will do that for you.
Mhm.
Do that to you, challenging every single day. But it's so important to be passionate about what you're doing so that when you do face those obstacles, you don't immediately have the quit signal coming in your brain. You're like, okay, it's a challenge, but I'm going to push through. Amazing. And I love that you were able to find something that supported all three of your pillars. And also, the business that you took on not only supports the mission of you empowering women, but you can identify and tell a personal story that gives it a little bit more meaning for you personally. And I'm sure that helps you relate a lot with your customers as well. And you can understand specifically what they're going through because you've had these same challenges, which is another cool aspect of the business that you've found and now are running. I want to ask a provocative question, maybe.
Mhm.
Do you regret any part of blowing up your life? And why or why not?
So, what's so funny? And I mentioned like when I was going through my reevaluation, one of the things is that I love to read. And I read a book on regret, a really good book by a guy named Daniel Pink. And I forget, it's like regret and then something, 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 something. I don't remember the something, something, something. But because I wanted to read it, because I don't know why when I turned 40, I was obsessed with like, well, I just don't want to regret anything. And so I read this
Mm.
book, and this book was really influential because it was like he had done a bunch of research. I think he had done like this worldwide study, right, of like thousands and thousands of people, which he was just asking them, what's your greatest regret or one of your regrets, right? And he
Yep.
thought that, like, okay, gosh, it's going to be super different based on like demographic and where they are in the world.
Uh-huh.
And what instead came back was like, it was universal. There were four main regrets that it all bubbled
Mhm.
down to. And the first
Okay.
regret was kind of like what I call morality or ethical regrets. Like, I wish I wouldn't have stole that. I wish I wouldn't have like cheated on my wife. I wish I wouldn't, like things that clearly they would have been in a better position had they not done that. And that's usually what regret is when you are convinced you would be better off now if you had not done that or done that. The second one were connection regrets. Like, I wish I would have stayed in
Mm.
touch with like that friend from growing up. I wish I wouldn't have like cut my son off for telling me he was gay,
Got
like
it.
these
Okay.
big, these connection people regrets. And then
Mhm.
another one, I'm like blanking on it right now, it'll come to me, but the one that really got me was these were boldness regrets. So they were regrets
Mm.
not for being bold, they were regrets
Mm.
for not being bold. I didn't start that business. I regret that I didn't like take that gap year and like discover myself. I regret that I didn't take a chance on that person. And that's what convinced me. It's you don't regret the things that you do. You regret the things that you don't do because you weren't brave enough to do them. And so,
Mm.
all of that blowing up were like, I don't want to stay in a marriage that I'm not happy and have my children suffer from that and me. I don't want to keep toiling away at corporate because it's comfortable and it's a steady paycheck, which is hard to give up, but not fulfilling. I don't want to keep putting myself last and not taking care of my wellness. And so, and I just thought about the third regret, which is kind of similar, but it's like doing things that where you didn't end up in a better place. So I regret dropping out of school. I regret not saving for retirement. I regret things that you'd be in a better situation. And so that reading that book really convinced me that like I don't think I'm going to regret blowing up the life and doing the business. I think I would regret not doing it.
Oh man, gosh, like knowledge bombs here. Thank you for sharing that. We haven't talked about regret on the podcast, and it was Amy Nelson, who is actually a prior guest of mine, who asked me this question. Does anybody regret making a bold move? And in essence, Morley, what you're saying is people don't regret making a bold move. The regret
Mm,
is not going for
yep.
it. And I'm going to put the book that you spoke about on the Bold Moves book list that's on my website because I think that would be a great one for people to get their hands on. I know a lot of listeners are in that midlife time frame, maybe thinking about what is the next bold move that's going to be more representative of who they are today and then who they want to become. And maybe thinking about it from that perspective is helpful. What will you regret if you don't do it?
Mm-hmm.
So I love that you brought that perspective to light today.
Mm-hmm.
I've got two more questions for you. We just spoke about one book, Regret. There was another book that you read. You told me about this book called 4,000 Weeks,
Yes.
maybe it's called.
Yes.
How did that influence you?
Yes, that was another major book. And that was actually really well timed with about turning 40 because you're kind of like, what is 4,000 weeks, right? And that is, if you think about, 52 weeks in a year, that's 80 years, that's people's lives.
Mm,
And it really just dawned on me again, like, gosh, like I only have approximately give or take 20, 2,000 more weeks, which doesn't seem like a
mm,
lot of time. And that's what the book is trying to get you to realize is that one, you've got to realize that we are all mortal and that time is not infinite. It is actually our greatest commodity, right? And everything's a
mhm.
trade-off. And that's really what helped me when I was thinking about, okay, where do I want to put my time? And just saying, hey, like, I don't want to work more than 30 hours a week because Any more than that, I'm trading off on other important stuff. And so I am very, very religious and like very disciplined about Monday through Thursday, 9 to 5 is what I work. And then my
Mhm.
time with the kids, because I split 50-50 custody, which is a blessing to have that, to have time for myself, but also a heartache too when I'm not with them. So when I'm with them, like I do not try to sneak in emails. I do not try to sneak in a work call or quick thing. I am with them. And then the other piece is when I prioritize like my wellness routines, right? And so that just really helped me realize that like, you know, you're whatever you spend your time on is what you're saying is important to you. And that it just helped me realize that I'm not going to try to squeeze a badillion things into the day thinking that it's going to all get done, but that I'm going to be very intentional. And I do that through time blocking and kind of saying this time block is for work, this time block. And I give myself the gift that if I'm in work, I don't think about my kids. And if I'm with my kids, I don't think about work. And then when I'm with myself, I don't think about either of those.
Yeah, it's really important to ask yourself that question. I don't think enough of us ask ourselves that question, but in a meaningful way. So, where are you putting your time, and where do you want to put your time? What's the difference, or where are you putting your time that you don't want to be putting your time? A prior guest, Allison Hare, actually or challenged us to color code our calendars today, the current calendar, and be like, what, let's just say green represents what you want to be doing, so you would mark all of those things that you want to be doing in green, and then you would mark other things like how you're giving your time away to other people in a different color, so that you could start to understand how much of yourself you're actually giving to other people and you're not spending in the way that you want, which I think is a really useful activity to start to get this inventory around, like, how much am I devoting to things that I don't even care about, I don't even want to be doing. And that's what you're saying is like, you are super intentional about living every moment exactly how you want to be living every moment. My last question for you, Morley, is, and I asked this last question, but I've changed it up a bit today, and I'll tell you why. My last question usually is, what do you know about being bold today you wish you would have known earlier on? Today's question, however, is that we are in May. It is currently early May as we're recording, and that's commencement season for a lot of different graduates. So you're coming out of high school, or you're coming out of college, or I don't know, maybe graduation means something else to you altogether, but we're in the season of commencement. So my question for you is along the same lines, but it's, what would you say to graduates about being bold?
Mm, gosh, this is a tricky one. Because a part of me is like, you know, the mindset, right? Like trust in the universe and whatever. But I honestly think you just got to go out there and you got to live it, right? And so my advice would be just go and live and try to push yourself out of your comfort zone so that you're constantly like learning and experimenting and failing and picking yourself back up again. And then through that, you're going to develop courage, you're going to develop confidence, you're going to develop, you know, this resilience, you're going to develop the mindset to kind of to help make you successful. But if you don't live it, you can't read it in a
Hmm.
book, you can't live it through someone else's experience. And so yeah, just be willing to go out there, and there's no right answer, it's all a journey and it's all a path, and just embrace it.
Awesome. It's been so fun to have you on the show today, Morley. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you? Where can they find Amara? How can people connect?
Yeah, so AmairaSkincare.com is our website. And then I am easily reachable probably through LinkedIn, Morli Desai. I think I'm the only one on there, hopefully. I don't know. I did have two profiles at one time, but we fixed that up. And happy to connect and chat with anyone where they think it'll be fruitful.
Amazing. I'll put all of your information in the show notes too, so people can go and open up the show notes and go right to you, so they don't have to go to LinkedIn and try to figure it out. I will have that covered. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. If you loved this episode, let's ask our listeners today to put skincare as the review. If you love this episode, leave us a 5-star review and add the word skincare if you don't know what else to say, or anything you want to say. It's Up to you, but that's just a suggestion for today's episode. And we will see you in the next one. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Morley, for being here.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.